I wanted to start off with a topic that's been troubling me a bit recently, which is, why do lawyers volunteer? In fact, why do any of us volunteer? Take my 5-year-old son. He decided to set up a new charity to end global poverty. He imaginatively called it, "Give money to the poor." He made some leaflets with a very simple message. Give money to the poor. He designed a logo which, by coincidence, has quite a strong resemblance to the logo of my organisation, Oxfam. And he decided to start off small by distributing leaflets up and down our street. And it makes me wonder, is volunteering in our nature? Or is it nurture? Or is it a bit of both? Take, for example, 2 British women who volunteer for Oxfam. The first one of them is Audrey Hope, who I met last month. Audrey started volunteering for Oxfam in 1964. She was a member of a pledged giving group whose members agreed to give the price of a loaf of bread every month. She went on to be a volunteer manager in one of our shops for 27 years. And earlier this year, she celebrated 50 years as a volunteer with Oxfam. She's one of over 20,000 people in this country who volunteer for Oxfam. But I think what's special about Audrey is her enthusiasm and her encouragement to other volunteers. She said to me, "My cardinal principle is that volunteering should be enjoyable." You may know the other one, Keira Knightley. Keira Knightley went with Oxfam to South Sudan in July this year. Now, fighting started off in South Sudan in December last year, and there are currently 1.3 million people who are internally displaced. And Oxfam's currently supporting 300,000 of those. So Keira Knightley went to South Sudan to visit the project. She said, when people asked her, "Who are you?" she said, "I really, really, really wished I could have said, I'm a doctor or something else useful. So instead I told them, I'm somebody who's going to ask people to give a lot of money to Oxfam so they can help you." And she succeeded. When she came back from South Sudan, she said, "I didn't cry when I was there. What bloody right would I have to cry when the people I met, who were living in as near to hell as I can imagine, weren't crying?" Being a volunteer isn't about your profession, whether you're a shop manager, a film star, or even a lawyer. It's about how you react in the face of need. And that's perhaps especially true when there's risk involved in volunteering. So what is it that makes people volunteer, especially in the face of risk? In South Sudan, the civil war has led to the deaths of thousands of Nuer and Dinka civilians. The Mundare are not part of either ethnic group. But volunteering transcends ethnicity, even or perhaps especially in the face of danger. One of them said this: "We are not Dinka or Nuer. We are Mundare from Central Equatorial. But the wars and conflicts affect us as well. We could not stand aside and let anything happen to Abraham and his family. It might have been risky, but we had no second thoughts about it. We just knew that we were saving innocent lives." Another one was asked why he was risking his life, and he said, "You're my friend. I don't want you to die." But risk can also bring together international and local volunteers, like in the fight against Ebola. Recently, 120 of our staff volunteered to go out to Sierra Leone and Liberia. We're the lead agency there for water, sanitation, and hygiene in the United Nations system. And hygiene is the key to stopping the spread of the disease. That's not least in the face of traditional burial practices, which involve families washing the bodies of their dead. And it comes after years in which the health infrastructure has been decimated by civil war, a lack of the right to health. Holly Taylor, one of the Oxfam volunteers from America, met with Mary and other community health volunteers in Tenge Town, an area in Freetown. Mary had lost 10 of her family members. But despite all, was it because of this, she was determined to teach other people about hygiene. So what do you think makes lawyers volunteer, sometimes in the face of risk? I was recruited to Oxfam by Joel Joffe, a South African lawyer. In 1963, when he was a younger lawyer in Johannesburg, he was asked to take on a hopeless legal case which no one else would take after the police raided Rivonia Farm and arrested members of the High Command of the African National Congress. Joel was approached by the wife of one of the Rivonia detainees to represent them. He tells it like this. She was asking that I should embark on a case of unknown duration in the defense of people I did not know, whose actions I knew nothing about, and on a charge which had not yet been formulated. He went on, it was a time when to be a nonconformist, to speak against the system, even to think against the system, was fraught with peril. Despite all the legal safeguards which were written into the law for the protection of an accused person, there was no longer any chance that there would be a fair trial. So, of course, Joel took the case. And he went on to defend Nelson Mandela, Sisulu, Mbeki, Goldberg, Bernstein, and the others. Steve's mentioned Martin Luther King's famous lines delivered at about the same time, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And these examples make me think, what is our role as lawyers in seeking justice through our day job and also through our volunteering, whether pro bono advice or other kinds of voluntary work? How do we decide as lawyers what pro bono and what other kinds of volunteering to do? Of course, this whole PillNet conference is testimony to the breadth, depth, and vitality of the pro bono sector. And it's also an encouragement to law firms and companies to work together, which I think is usually as unlikely as expecting Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort to play a friendly Quidditch game together. I saw a great example of lawyers' cooperation last month when I attended the launch of a report which Oxfam co-published on implementing the Protocol on the Rights of Women in Africa. It was a powerful analysis of Kenya's legal framework in which women across many firms and barristers' chambers in this country had joined with lawyers in Kenya in working out how law can be changed to make a difference to women's lives. Lawyers in this country working with lawyers in Kenya. There's so much good news that can be said about pro bono, and this conference helps tell the story. You're very good at it. It's my pleasure to say thank you to all those of you who do pro bono work for us. You know what works, you know what makes a difference, and I guess you wouldn't be here if you didn't like it. But the scale of the challenge is still immense. It's definitely true the world has achieved impressive steps forward in reducing extreme poverty, defined as less than $1.25 a day. The measures are a little bit contested, but it's clear that several 100 million people have lifted themselves out of extreme poverty since the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, were proclaimed. But as Ban Ki-moon put it, we have to finish the job. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization reporting this September, there are still over 805 million men, women, and children who are hungry every day. That's 1 in 9 of the world's population. And according to the Commission on Legal Empowerment, up to 4 billion people do not have the full benefit of the rule of law and access to justice. So one of the lawyers we've been working with on this is Magdalena Sepulveda Carmona. She's a Chilean lawyer who was until recently the UN, United Nations Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. A lot of the UN Special Rapporteurs are lawyers, and all of them are volunteers. Magdalena made the point as Special Rapporteur that it's harder for people living in poverty to engage with the justice system when they have a lack of information about what their rights are, and often when there's illiteracy or other linguistic barriers. And she said that gets worse when it's coupled with the entrenched stigma that attaches to extreme poverty. When it's like that, she says, a person living in poverty cannot uphold their rights or challenge injustice. So can we encourage and empower communities to hold their governments to account? Like in Uganda, where in 2010, 3 acts of parliament were passed on domestic violence, on female genital mutilation, and on the control of trafficking, but where implementation and budget funding for all 3 are still insufficient. Now, we may soon have a new international focus for this work at the United Nations. Next year, the MDGs are going to be replaced by the new Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 currently being proposed. And of these, Goal 16 has got 3 elements. To promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, to provide access to justice for all, and to build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. That's not a bad 3 challenges for the legal community for the next few years. Let me say them again. To promote peaceful and inclusive societies, to provide access to justice for all, and to build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. NGOs in general, and I think Oxfam in particular, need to do more work with the legal community if we're to have any hope at all of achieving these goals. We do love the work our pro bono lawyers do for us, and I'd like to affirm they do it with unstinting commitment and huge skill. Thank you. You know who you are, and thanks for the nice biscuits. But on top of the pro bono contribution, we also recognize that we need to work differently. That's what's driving us and our partner organizations throughout the world to think of new solutions with Oxfam, with law, and with lawyers. We will continue to work with law firms and with companies, and we will do it really, really well. But we also want to reach out to individual lawyers in their personal capacity and not just as members of a company or a law firm. And that's because we're learning that empowered individuals sometimes do more than their work persona permits. It's not just about our identity as members of a particular company. It's about our identity as members of families, of communities, and of society. It's about our own lifelong journey. It's for students and retired lawyers, as well as academics, judges, and practicing lawyers. In fact, it's for anyone who self-identifies himself or herself as committed to justice and the use of the law to achieve it. And I think one of the reasons why this works so well is to be found in the word volunteer itself. Isn't it a great word? It means we've made a choice. We didn't have to do this. I love the French word volontiers. It gives the sense I've done it willingly. And because we do it of our own free will, our own choice, we do it well. Volunteering works because we do it with passion. I mentioned earlier that we have over 20,000 volunteers raising money for Oxfam. Why can't we have 1,000 lawyers, dare I say more than 1,000 lawyers, working with us to ensure access to justice for all, to build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions? But before I get carried away, I promise we're starting off small. We're setting up a steering committee and a network of supporters who'll get involved to different levels and different degrees, depending on their time and capacity. We're selecting strategic projects that can go to scale or which can achieve systemic change. And these will involve legal partners and community groups throughout Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. They involve customary law, and they involve statute law. They involve local, national, and global issues. They come from the ground up, but they're rooted in a theory of change that empowered communities are better able to influence laws, policies, and institutions at all levels, as Goal 16 suggests, so that they're less prone to elite capture and they work better in the interests of poor people. This has to be accompanied by rigorous monitoring and evaluation in which we learn and adapt as we go along. So I think this direct link with volunteers, legal volunteers, gives some alternative to short-term approaches to the 1 to 3 year cycle of projects that's typical of some justice projects. Instead, with this, we can commit to change for as long as it takes. Legal volunteers are not bound by their timesheets, although if you enjoy doing timesheets, I'm sure we can make some up for you. But they're not bound by being members of a particular firm or indeed being in a company or a firm at all. They can be involved as individuals for as long as they like. Maybe we can harness the enthusiasm, passion, and skills of a wider network of legal volunteers in the fight against poverty. Volunteers like Audrey, like Kira, like Molly and Mary, like Joel, like Magdalena, like the Mundari in South Sudan, like many of you, maybe even my 5-year-old son, show us another way is possible. Maybe our voluntary impulse is part of the human condition. Maybe when we volunteer together of our own free will in a collective endeavor, we can achieve far, far more than we ever dared think was possible. Let's do it. Let's finish the job. Thank you.